So have you ever had any friends from other cultures and countries tell you that English is, hard for them because it's so flowery and formal and it's, difficult for them to remember all the social niceties?
Yeah, yeah, that's a common complaint actually,
Yeah.
and a great topic for this week. I've actually heard from so many friends that speak different languages and from so many cultures that that's actually one of the common complaints that they say. And it leads me on to a really good story that I remember when I first arrived in Dubai,
Hmm.
and I had all my boxes, my furniture and things like that arriving
Yeah.
with a removal company, and they arrived to the villa, and there were some lovely men that got out, and they were Indian, and they were speaking Hindi, I think, and they started to unpack all the furniture into the house and things like that. And I remember it was a hot day, so I gave them water, bottles of water. And as I was handing out the water, they didn't say thank you to me
Hmm.
as I
Yeah.
was doing it. And I remember
And
at the
how did
time
that feel?
I didn't like it. I remember at the time thinking, gosh, how rude, because I
Hmm.
didn't know
Yeah.
enough.
You
I
didn't know
just
enough about the
arrived, didn't
culture.
know enough about the culture. And obviously that really, from my perspective, being British, that really irked me.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking about it later on. And when I used to speak Chinese, when I was learning Chinese and I used to speak it, I remember consciously thinking that I have to be rude or I am being rude.
Yeah.
Because in Chinese, they do have the word please and thank you, obviously, but they don't use it as in to the same extent as we do. And obviously they say, quite a lot of times when you hear Chinese people speaking about Westerners who speak in Chinese, they'll say
Hmm.
we overuse please and thank you all the time. So
Oh,
we're saying xie
definitely.
xian all the time. And they can tell that it's an overuse for their perspective in their culture. They
Well, they
don't.
know why you're doing it. Usually, yeah.
Yeah, but we're putting Western values into the language of Chinese as you're speaking it, and it's interesting because I'm consciously aware that I have to, for my level of comfortability, I'm being rude or I'm being blunt, but I'm not. It's just the way it
You're
is.
very
But
hyper aware of the fact
yeah,
of
so they
analyzing that. Yeah.
so when you're speaking in Chinese, you won't say, "Excuse me, waiter, can I have?" or "Please bring me." You just say, "Waiter, water."
Yeah.
And it's not rude, but
Hmm.
from my perspective, when I say it, yeah, I feel like I'm being rude towards that person. That's quite strange, isn't it?
Hmm. There's so many different articles after we spoke about this before. I remember finding some articles about that Indian particular issue. And I think you spoke about it with a friend as well, who gave you some context to why that happens in their culture with the please and thank you.
Yeah, because I think I remember talking about it later and to a friend of mine, and she said that they have this efficiency of language. So it's almost like there's an intimacy. Um, it's an understood
It's
basically. So
implied.
it's implied, and
Yeah.
so when I was expecting the thank you, but they don't have to give that to me because by them saying thank you in their culture, they're creating a barrier or a buffer.
Mhm.
There's they have an intimacy in their language, and I created a buffer to that,
Mhm.
and so that was me
And
being not
especially
polite.
within families, right? You wouldn't, it would be almost rude to say that to a family member because it would
Yeah,
be creating that distance
so
between
it
you.
creates that distance.
Yeah.
So like Indian people, especially if you're talking to your elders or your relatives, or they tend to feel that, but this is what she explained to me, that by thanking them, you're violating that intimacy with them, and you're creating much more of a formality
A barrier.
and a
Yeah.
distance that shouldn't exist between you.
Hmm.
And I remember my jaw dropping when I heard that, and I thought, oh no,
Wow.
had I actually expected that man to say thank you, and had he done it, I would have
He
been
was being
creating.
polite in his culture.
He was being
Yeah.
polite to me in his culture, and
Such a
that's
complex scenario.
yeah, and that's what I had to learn the hard way in a way.
Uh,
And then I had to look at it from his perspective, actually, in that by not saying thank you to me, he was being polite.
yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that subtle? It's just,
Languages and cultures are fascinating, aren't they?
yeah, very
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yes, I know in having worked with Finnish people, also in Dubai, some of the kids and families I worked with were Finnish. And also, I know because my own family roots are Finnish, how people commonly just greet you by nodding. And they don't have to go through all this formal hello, how are you? And I remember one parent saying to me, I find it incredibly exhausting going down the hallway in the school and having to say hello and how are you to four staff or four other parents just to get my child dropped off. And I totally understand when she's talking about that, because she said it's just so much easier to just nod and greet someone like that. And I thought that is true.
Yeah, I remember when
So,
I went to school in Belgium, and you always have to give la bise, so it was a kiss on the cheek
yeah.
to say good morning, and you literally went into the classroom in the morning and you had to go through everybody,
Wow.
and that's
You need
20,
additional
25
time, right?
people. Yeah, it's 20, 25 people you had to give, la bise
Easy.
to, and
Yeah.
if you missed somebody, oh, they were miffed. So it's all those little subtleties, and that's interesting, because I've always thought that there's the what you call the ladder of politeness,
Mhm.
and I just find that fascinating, how
Mm.
when you can say, for example, in English, a beginner speaker will say go, and
Mhm.
then they learn you go, and then it's can you go, and then
Yeah.
it's can you please go, and then it's
It
would
gets
you
longer and
kindly.
longer.
Yeah, and the sentences get much more highfalutin, and
Mhm.
would you be so kind as to leave now. And in
Mhm.
English, the last sentence is ideal. It's polite, and it's the perfect English, and it's got good grammar, and it's using all the kind of
Mhm.
subjunctives and phrases and things like that. So and that's what we esteem to have in English. And if the more polite that you speak, the better, technically,
Mhm.
in inverted commas, that you speak. What's interesting is that the first sentence, go, for a Chinese person, that's totally acceptable too. That's equivalent almost to
Mhm.
the last sentence that we have in English.
Mhm.
It's not rude. It's the way that the language
Yeah.
is structured. And I just find that the ladder of politeness fascinating. And I'm always talking to different language speakers about their ladder of politeness, and
Mhm. I
where
think
that comes from.
it really comes down to understanding worldviews. So not
Yeah,
just the language and not only the culture, but the perspective of those people in the culture, right?
that's so
So
true.
I know there's something really fascinating called the rice theory that's from the University of Virginia, I believe. And so it shows the differences between the rice culture and the wheat culture. So people who come from rice culture, so Asian cultures, let's say, who eat a lot of rice, they actually have much more collaboration and cooperation within their communities. So they value more that collectivism. Um, so a lot of their traditions and things like that come from that.
And the
Whereas,
Confucian mindset
yeah,
and
exactly.
philosophy,
And then the wheat culture, which is obviously the
individualistic, isn't
more
it?
individualistic, because apparently one family can just do all of the tasks
Well, they
themselves,
can plant and
farming and
grow and
yeah, and
harvest
harvest.
a
Yeah.
field of wheat by themselves, so they don't need to have so much. Yeah, that's a great theory. There's
Yeah.
not so much collaboration necessary. Whereas if you actually want to irrigate a rice paddy field, then you can't just
Mhm.
irrigate one field. If you all of the farmers that have all their fields have to do that together. So there's a
Together,
much
yeah.
more interconnectivity in
Right.
their culture.
So
Yeah, that's so true.
that's something really important to take note of, that your students, whoever you're working with in whatever culture, may have a totally different mindset and worldview to you. So don't make assumptions that everybody, the way people look at certain concepts like love or marriage or something like that, are just the way you see it. So I think the takeaways are to really try and get to know the students and their perspectives, and how their perspectives on certain issues or topics within your classroom can be totally different. And sometimes it may be a risk for them to step out and share, because if there's a norm established within
Yes,
the
within the
classroom,
classroom. Yeah.
that could be very risky and they might not like to stand out. Whereas if you start to create a classroom community where students feel it's okay to share and it's okay to be different or diverse, then they would probably be more open about sharing these different worldviews. And you can even link that into your lessons, for example. So I think what you want to do is just try and create different opportunities where that can naturally happen. So it's something that doesn't automatically happen, but you can nurture, and be a little deliberate about how you want that to happen. And eventually it'll start to really flow, I think.
Oh,
So,
great. And it makes the world a more interesting place. I mean, if we all saw the world
yeah.
from the same perspective, it would be pretty dull.
Oh,
And
definitely.
I think that's one of the joys and blessings of being a teacher is, and with many different children in from different backgrounds and languages, is that you are a little bit of a detective sometimes in asking the children
Mm.
about their cultures and where they come
Yes.
from, and you learn from
You
that.
see
You
the
don't,
whole richness. You get exposed to all
yeah,
of that if you want to see it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Lovely. So hopefully there's some golden nuggets that people can take away and apply in their classrooms this week.
Great chat today.
Yes. Bye.
Bye, Ali.